ITRE she nazd ajdaban yinisha nakaidena bashichin kitlachitni dachache ado ashin dachanella. My name is Daryl Marks. I'm originally from Tunalia, which is north of Flagstaff. I am Navajo, and so the clans that I shared with you are the one that I am, which is White Corn Zuni Edgewater. I am born for those going home. My maternal grandparents are Red House, and my paternal grandparents are Salt People. I'm a father of 3. I have my 2 sons and my daughter, and in that sense it helps me step into my role as a parent and as an individual within my community. Now, I was asked to share a little bit about Navajo understandings in the way of being, and I've come into this practice as it was passed down from my grandparents to my grandmother, to my mother, and to me. I continue to go back and get guidance from my elders, as well as from the young people learning these practices for the first time and then making that a part of their makeup. So here in Flagstaff, we sit at the foot of the San Francisco Peaks. In Navajo, we call it Dak Oslid, which is the mountain that always has snow. And there's a lot of teachings that come with this practice and in living in this space. San Francisco Peaks to the Navajo is this western mountain, and for Navajo people, we look to our cardinal directions to not only provide us a context of where we reside or how we exist and continue to manifest our understandings of the universe and the world around us, but also how we continue to conduct ourselves. And so for us as Navajo people, we live in a very physical, spiritual, mental, and emotional environment. And we carry all of those characteristics with us daily. And so for Navajo people, the first thing that we do in the morning is we wake up to the east. And for our younger people, they're encouraged to run to the east to help wake up their body physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And they make their offerings and then they come back. And from that point on, they're able to move through their day with that start, that guidance, that practice. From that direction, we take ourselves south and we look to how are we conducting ourselves during the day? What are the things that we have in front of us? What are our tasks? How do we show up for our family or for our community? And for the western direction, or when we look to the west, we're thinking about what our social environments look like, how we find ourselves when we come home. And so the western mountain has those characteristics of that it is home. And so as we're looking to the setting of the sun, as Navajo, we look to the western direction, and that's, for us, the direction of home, community, and obviously family, but definitely in the sense of education. So when we think about those family makeups, when we all come home and we sit around the dinner table, or when we come home and we are embraced and met with our family, we often get to share those stories and experiences of what we've done through the day, what we've learned. And so for Navajo people, when we come into that western direction and look to that guidance and that practice that comes from these mountains, we look to see what are our experiences, how has that shaped who we are, and how does that continue to bring us closer together in that community or in that family makeup. And these are important. These relationships are important to us, and we try to exercise these practices throughout our day and throughout, all of our experiences and our engagements with one another. And so when we're looking to the western direction, or when we find ourselves coming home and we're sharing all of these things, we're not just sharing it with just our parents or just our children. We're talking about multi-generational. And so for Navajo families, we look to our elders who are hopefully present in the home, hopefully present in that experience of guiding and growing and learning. But we're also learning from our children about how they see the world and what are the new experiences that we must remind ourselves of, that innocence and that practice, so that we're all hand over hand taking care of one another. And then, of course, we have the northern direction, and the northern direction for us holds many understandings. For the colors, we look to the north, and that's black. Of course, that's the night sky. and we look to the night sky and we see, you know, the stars that provide guidance, to provide teachings, to provide understandings of when certain things should take place during our existence. But it's also a time for healing, whether that's physically, when our body's resting, it's starting to, you know, repair itself and heal and, you know, be ready for that next day. Or if it's a ceremony that we're participating in, and in that ceremony we're trying to heal the spiritualness of ourselves, mend and bring together a clearer consciousness in our thinking. But also, when we participate in ceremony, we have our families, our communities present, so that helps us feel more conducive with one another, but also helps support that emotional need that we all have as individuals. And so all of these directions have a teaching, all of these directions have a purpose and a practice and a way of being. And of course, much like you would have a fireplace or a hearth in the center of your home to provide warmth and to provide, you know, the necessary tools to be able to provide food or cook and prepare things like that. Fires can also be used to encourage protection. And so when in a traditional Navajo home, you'll have that fire at the center of the structure to have all of these characteristics in mind, where the fire is there to protect, to warm, and to also provide. But it's also there for prayer. And so we speak to it as if it was our grandfather or our grandparent. And so as we have these conversations with the fire and we talk about what are the things that we need, we are participating in this very physical activity. Is however much we feed to it, that's how much we'll receive. So the hotter we want our home, the warmer we want that to be, or the more things that we're trying to prepare for food, or the more protection that we need, the more that we feed it. So in that same sense, we have to look at ourselves as Navajo people, that we often find ourselves as the fire, or we often find certain things in our life that we need to feed and we need to take care of and we need to manage and have respect for. So there's a lot of these teachings when we talk about whether that's our commitment to one another, our connections to one another, you know, our responsibilities in our relationships, and in how are we being reciprocal in those relationships with one another. How are we, you know, maintaining those relationships with one another? And so when we think about all of these connections and we think about how we continue to manifest those relationships and how we take care of one another, what is the rigor? What is the amount of intention that we're putting forward in that? We think about, well, if the child in our home was the fire, or if our family was the fire, or our community was that fire, how are we taking care of one another? How are we, you know, supporting one another and being present in one another's lives? And how are we hoping that that's reciprocated? You know, what are we giving and what are we receiving? So when we think about all of these things in a very complex understanding of Navajo way of being and philosophy and way of life, it helps support us in all of our makeup. So if I was to find myself in a community all by myself, faced with challenges or faced with choices of like, should I do this, or can I do this? Would I do this? And what would my family think of that? We often bring all of those relationships forward. We often have a lot of those conversations within ourselves and with our communities, is how would that look? How are we being reflected? So earlier when I introduced myself, I was talking about the 4 clans, the people that I come from. My mother, my father, my mother's father, my father's father, because I'm responsible to them. They were all there to help shape me and who I am and who I'm meant to be. But they're also present for my children, who I mentioned. And so as I move forward in my life, it's not just about one individual self and my choices that I make. It's the choices that reflect and impact my entire community. And what that continues to look like is, if I make a choice and it's a bad choice, it's a reflection on my family and how they brought me up, or how my family continues to be a part of my existence. And so if I was to break that connection, there's still a lot of pain, there's still a lot of anguish that can be present in all of that. And so when I talked about ceremony and I talked about healing, a lot of that has to start with how we begin our day, what we do during that day, how we go home and connect with our family, and how we choose to heal as we mend everything and we start the cycle anew. So it's a never-ending cycle. It's always continual, but we need to make sure that we maintain those relationships, because that's what helps give us strength. That's what helps moves us forward. And so, as I said, we have those 4 clans. It doesn't just identify me to my mother or my father or my siblings or my grandparents or even just my children. It's connecting me to my entire community, because I have relatives that share the same clan that I might have never met in my life, or that are so distant and so far removed from my physical environment that I'm still responsible to with my choices and my actions. And so the choices that I make as I move forward are always impacting somebody somewhere other than just myself. So that's how we're taught as we're growing up to not only take care of one another, but to take care of ourselves, and to avoid any misgivings or vices that would detract us from the path that is set before us. And so, as I said before, in the beginning, when we wake up, we go out into the dawn, into that first light, that white sky, and we make our offerings of corn pollen, or tadadin in Navajo, we say. We give those offerings. We talk about where we're going, where we've been, how we find ourselves to be in the space that we're existing in at that moment, our aspirations, and then we talk about everything else around us, and then how that's manifested. And we continue to talk about these concepts of beauty and harmony, hajon and nijona, because those are integral. They're part of our prayers and our practices, because those are the things that we want to have present always. Those are the things that we pray for. Those are the things that are in our daily language, is to continue to maintain what harmony is, or to manifest harmony, or to create the intention of harmony and beauty all at the same. Because that's, again, who we are and how we're reflecting of our relatives and our descendants, and as well as our faith and understanding. So that's just the human aspect. And then we also have all of our relatives that we're connected to. So I mentioned before that I am White Corn Zuni Edgewater. Edgewater people are considered water people. So I have a respect and responsibility to water in that same sense. And so no matter where I go, any of my interactions with either water or the animals or beings that exist in water, I have to have those respects. I have to have that practice and maintain those relationships, and maintain the relevance or the rigor in those relationships with those beings. So I'm always with family, no matter where I go. I'm always responsible to somebody else and reflective of someone else. And so even in the physical environment that I find myself today, here in Flagstaff, at the feet of Dako Oslid, at the feet of this mountain, my actions are being witnessed and watched, and whatever I choose to do and how I choose to live impacts my environment and everything that exists around it. So a lot of responsibility, a lot of pressure, but it's not one that should be stressful. It's one that should be supportive, and that it goes back to the Navajo understanding of how we cradle one another and how we cradle our children when they're born. They're gifted with a breath of life that as they reach out into the world and they emerge into this existence, they're given a breath of life, and there's a responsibility for how they speak. But also, as that breath of life extends through their body, it reaches to the extremities. And so we have like that wind spiral in our fingertips and our toes, because it starts right here at the top of our head, all of our thoughts, everything that comes into our being. And as it swirls through our body, we have to maintain that responsibility for it. And so we have to respect our body, even if we're concentrating on just our feet or our hands or our head. We have to maintain this beauty and harmony throughout of our existence, and move with purpose as we go forward. And so as we take care of our bodies and we have that responsibility for ourselves, everything that we do, whether that's if we sleep in, if we consume too much of something, or we don't eat enough, or we don't take care of our bodies, or if we, develop vices or anything like that, that impacts us. And it impacts all of our relations around us. So as I said before, we're talking about our children and the way that we cradle them. One of the first teachings that I was taught when my children were born was to hold their head towards the fire, because the warmth of that fire, the teachings, the prayers, and the intentions that are put into that fire are to reach into that soft spot that most children are born with. And it's to help ignite their mind, to provide that warmth, because we want them to be thinking beings. We want them to be charged with this responsibility, and for all of those things to enter in their body. Just as they emerged, to receive that breath, they're given that fire so that they can, move forward with purpose and intention and practice. And then we continue to protect and support them throughout their lives. In that sense. And so we continue to maintain these relationships and these responsibilities, not only as parents, grandparents, and community, but as other beings that share the same space. And so we think about, again, what are some of the vices and some of the substances that come into our lives or come into our practice of existence, and that challenge us to make choices that we're responsible to, right? Whether that's drugs and alcohol, or the abuse of different substances, whether that's prescriptions and tobacco. We have to learn through all of these practices, witness everything through all these different lenses. How are we to conduct ourselves? What's appropriate and what's not? And how is it that what I might consume or what I might ingest, how is that going to be reflective of my responsibility to my relatives, my responsibility to my community, and the environment that I exist in? What is supportive and what's not? So we continue to have all of these checks and balances in our lives. And of course, we're not without fallacy. There are individuals who've consumed, who've tested, who've experimented with. And it's again, not to be such a negative detriment on them. It's not something that's intended to scar them for life. There are ways in and there are ways out. And for Navajo people, we talk about everything in such a cycle, a circular way of being, that if we start in one space, we're going to come all the way back around and end and start again in the same space. So if an individual finds himself, lost, or, they come off track and they experiment, or they get consumed by what they choose to consume, right? And that shapes and reshapes their lives, then they have the opportunity to come back and renew themselves in the same ways that we can every day. We rise to the sun, we pray to the setting of it, we rest, we heal, and then we come back again. We have those circles, right? Just the same way as the earth has its revolutions and it goes through the seasons. We as individuals have that opportunity to do the same thing. Whether we have small circles or big ones, we have that opportunity to come back to the beginning and start again, to renew ourselves and maintain that practice. It's just, what relationships do we have? How do we maintain those relationships with our community, with our family, or with our environments around us? How do we utilize the cultural practices? How do we utilize the cultural practices to help support us and move forward in that way? Some people don't have all of those supports, or at least it's not, present in their lives, but it's there. It's there just as much as this mountain is here, and it's not going to go anyway anytime soon. Well, with everything, the mountain is, with the snow flurries and stuff, there's teachings to go along with that. And it's like reminding us that we're not quite ready to start again. So we're gonna continue to give you those reminders that there's a beginning, and you need to be responsive and respectful of that beginning. And so there's teachings to, the mountain, like I said, its name comes from always having snow. Even in the summertime, there's spaces on the northern side of the mountain that always have snow. And it's to remind us again, like, it's there, but no matter how far we go in life, there's always the opportunity to come back. There's always the responsibility of returning to the beginning and starting again. I heard an elder talk to me about trees, and had said, of course, like, the deeper the root, the stronger the tree. And the stronger the tree's roots, then the bigger it can bloom, and its limbs can reach out, and the more fruit that it can bear. But they said if you look at it, and you were able to open up that tree and talk to it, you would see those rings, and it would tell you how healthy that tree has been, all the stories that it's gone through, and the experiences that it's had, right? It'll tell you what that looks like. And they said, we're the same way. Our impacts on the universe, or how the universe impacts us, is all reflective. It's all relative. And they said that, we're very much like those trees. We just need to deepen our roots and know where we come from, know how we connect, or where we connect in our environment. And what does that look like to the fruit that we bear? How do we contribute back to our communities? And so as we look to each direction has their colors, but each direction, each mountain especially, shares similar characteristics. Some of the mountains are male, some of the mountains are female, but they're all connected. And that's to remind us as five-fingered beings, as living beings, that we have all of these connections, and that no matter where we find ourselves in our lives, whenever we reawaken, right, that we have the opportunity to start again and reconnect, and then move from that point forward and then back again, right? Coming back home, coming back to that sense of purpose and place. And so for me, I'm looking out and I'm seeing the snow flurries, and I'm seeing the mountain hiding behind the snow, hiding behind the clouds. And it's to remind me again that, there's still the new day, there's still an opportunity for things to start again. And whenever we restart, we have the opportunity to decide, well, what worked before, what didn't work, and how can I adjust? What do I need to do to manage, or move through that practice? So there's a lot to just how our physical environment connects and communicates with us. And like I said before, I've learned a lot from my elders, and I continue to learn more from them. For me, my blessing has been my children, being able to pass down from generation to generation the things that my grandparents or my great-grandparents said to me, or to my relatives around me, and pass those on to my children when they were young and infant and new. They started asking those questions, like, why then? Why was that done? What's the purpose of that? And in that teaching or reteaching, right, sharing what I've learned back to my children, they started to implement those things into their lives and into their practices, and say, well, if we're supposed to do this, then we should be doing this. And then the question came, why don't you do that? How come you're not practicing those things? And so it gave me cause to redirect myself and start over again. And then I've learned from my children through their experiences as new individuals into these experiences. From their beginnings, I've learned everything that my grandparents tried to teach me, that I felt like Western science or Western practices drew me away from. And so I've had the opportunity to be reborn in that sense, learning how to, exist in this practice as my sons exist in this practice, or my daughter exists in this practice, and seeing what my elders really meant by these teachings that they had learned from, their grandparents or great-grandparents. And so it's made my job as a parent so much easier, because the culture is already doing all the teaching. Everything, the guideline, the lesson plans, it's there. It's already in front of me. And so all I have to do is pass that on to my children and say, these are the things that your elders and your ancestors wanted. These are the things that you're responsible to. These are the practices and the ways of being. This is how you should talk. This is how you should, conduct yourself. These are the relationships that you need to maintain. And all I have to do is just reinforce that by providing the example, or by putting them in front of individuals who have that practice or can talk more to that practice and share that back with them, so that they don't feel alone in this, in their endeavors or wherever they find themselves. And so as a parent, knowing that I have the culture to just share and provide to my children the opportunities to witness it, I get to, as a parent, just enjoy being a parent. I get to enjoy watching them grow, and in that opportunity, I'm often like reminded of these memories of my grandparents sitting and witnessing us growing up and just being joyful and happy, and reminding themselves being reminded of their youthfulness and the laughter that they would share with us. So I'm the Native American Academic Advisor at Flagstaff High School within the counseling department. And I've had opportunities to engage with students who need that extra ear to talk to. And I've heard from students who've shared from their experiences as either coming from a family that has substance abuse problems, or that they themselves struggle with substance abuse. And in those opportunities that I've had to speak with students, I have to make sure that I am responsible to my role, that I'm not the parent, but I'm there to support. And so in having those conversations with students about their choices that they're making for themselves specifically, is to remind them first and foremost to breathe, because when we breathe, we find a peace, and we're being, of course, as Navajo, we're being more reflective and responsible to that breath that's given to us. But in that breath, as we take it in, we are mindful of, what does that do for us physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually? And then from there, we have our grounding, and we can move forward and talk about what are some of the choices that we make, and what are some of the reasons those choices might lead to them participating in the consumption of other substances that are like alcohol and drugs. And so always drawing back, as I said, creating this circle of understanding and taking them through an experience of, what are the impacts on the community of those substances? How are they participant to those impacts? And then how are those impacts going to be manifested in their intentions for their future? How do they want to engage? And where do they see themselves as they come back around full circle? And so when we talk about, our responsibilities to ourselves, how are we participating in that reciprocal relationship with our community, and even with, an understanding of these substances, if we're consuming them, what is the takeaway? What are they actually doing for us? And how is that shaping who we are or who we want to be? And in that same sense and practice of, okay, this is what it's doing to you, this is what you get from it, couldn't you find that peace or that solace or that comfort from something else, right? If you feel like consuming alcohol or consuming, some other foreign substance helps you, cope, what are other ways that you could work that out? What are other ways you can address it? And then what does your community look like? And how do you need to reposition yourself so that your community is a healthy one that can be supportive and conducive with that intended purpose and practice of, like, this is how we cradle one another, and this is how we carry ourselves forward. And so I often remind them of, like, who they are and where they come from, their relations to one another, and their relations to their family and how they carry their family with them all the time. And how their family at one point used to carry and cradle them as children, and still hold them in that regard, no matter how old they get. So the choices that they make are reflective of that relationship and have impacts on their community and their family and on their future, whether that's future children of their own or future children within their community that they're related to. Because in our clanships, we could meet a 2-year-old child and recognize that that child by clan is our grandparent, or we could meet a 60-year-old person and learn that that person is our child by clan. And so how are we responsible to those individuals? How are we participating in that relationship? And so by reminding young individuals that come into my office and have these conversations about those relationships and who's actually witnessing to their experience in life, helps in reshaping and regrounding and in moving forward in a new sense of practice where we should be. And so, continually building upon that and in, asserting or positioning myself that now I'm a part of your community. Now I'm a part of your circle or your experience. And so what choices you make impact me as well, impact my family because we're a part of your community. And helping those individuals have a grounding and a basis for what their community comes from. If their family life or their structure that they come from is toxic or is not as supportive as it should be.